All right. So hello and good morning, everyone, or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Salvador Munoz, and I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs and Outreach at Poster House, which is the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of the poster. I am so excited to welcome you to this morning's program, a virtual curatorial tour of the acclaimed exhibition Made in Japan, 20th Century Poster Art. Today, guest curators Nozomi Naoi and Erin Schoneveld will walk us through the amazing exhibition and share highlights from 100 years of Japanese poster design. Now, before we get started, I just want to share a few notes about accessibility for this program. Automated closed captioning is available for those who prefer it, and you can turn it on or off by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And this program is being recorded and will be made available for all registered attendees after the event. So if you miss a part, don't worry, you can go back and watch it. And if you have any questions during the program, you can drop them in either the chat or the Q&A box, and I'll go ahead and vocalize them for you at the appropriate interval. We'll also have a Q&A section at the end, so if we don't get to your question at the right time, don't worry, we'll still have time to get to it. And now that all that housekeeping is out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to Erin and Nozomi.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm going to share the screen. Bear with me for a moment here. Okay, I hope everyone can see this. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Erin Schoneveld, Associate Professor of East Asian Languages and Cultures at Haverford College. And along with my colleague and co-curator, Nozomi Naoi, we're thrilled to welcome you here, all of you here today for the virtual tour of the exhibition Made in Japan, 20th Century Poster Art at the Poster House Museum. So Japanese poster design reflects the country's rich visual culture and printmaking tradition and was used throughout the 20th century to represent the country to domestic and international audiences alike. So two world wars, in addition to rapid industrialization, urbanization, and the rise of mass media, fundamentally transformed modern Japan, and its specific journey as both an aggressor and a victim of war reinforced the nation's efforts to revamp its image. Within this context, posters allow Japanese artists and designers, corporations, brands, and the government to shape the social, political, and ideological values of the time with compositions that blended elements of traditional and modern design. So I'm just sharing a few of the installation shots from our fantastic exhibition. So this exhibition explores the cultural and political shifts within modern Japan that influence the functions and messaging of its advertising posters and the public's response to them. The Merrill Berman collection of posters that we drew from for the exhibition contains more than 1,000 Japanese posters, primarily from the post-war period, so post-1945, spanning avant-garde art, propaganda, graphic media, and commercial design. Through a selection of the major works from the Berman collection, this exhibition seeks to provide an overview of 20th century Japanese poster art and design that is both reflective of and informed by key moments, movements, and figures in Japanese history, popular culture, art, and society.
So we'd like to walk you through some of the sections that we have in the exhibition. And hello, I am Nozomi Naoi, the other curator. I'm an associate professor of art history at Yale and US College in Singapore. So I'm coming from that side of the world. So good evening if any of you are joining from that side. And I'm a specialist in Japanese prints and visual culture. And we're really excited to have all of you here. So we wanted to walk you through the different sections that are thematic so that you can get a sense of the larger story that we're trying to tell in the exhibition, and also some highlights of posters that are especially important within them. Now, through the exhibition, we wanted to tell a visual story of 20th century Japanese history, culture, and society through the lens of these wonderful posters. As Erin said, though, this was a very tumultuous time with a lot of things happening, both in Japan and in the world. And so this was a very challenging task. Through roughly a chronological progression, we have chosen themes for each of these sections to help us navigate through these tumultuous times. And we were hoping that also that these themes are ones that still resonate with us today, especially when we get to the last section. I think that you'll feel a lot of this. Now, by tracing the cultural shifts and technological transformation of the Japanese poster art, this exhibition explores the dynamic space in which things like painting, woodblock prints, fashion, photography, mass culture, and politics all are in dialogue with each other. Now, one of the main themes that comes across the entire exhibition is this kind of negotiation between a kind of Japaneseness and the kind of larger global and Western changes that occur during the 20th century. This specifically resonated with me personally as well as a Japanese scholar working in a kind of global sphere. And my research has always revolved around the kind of negotiations of Japan's identity and Japanese modernity within an influx of Western influences coming in during the 20th century. And so it was also a kind of search for my own identity as well. And I hope that many of you here in the audiences and people hopefully going to see the exhibition can also resonate with that kind of search for identity and these negotiations as well. And so we started this exhibition off with this theme and these negotiations with two really terrific posters. And I'll go through these two right now. The first one is by Kamekura Yusaku, which is this one that you're seeing right now. And he was known as a kind of founding father of Japanese graphic design. This here, you see the white letters spelling Japan at the center. This poster captures the height of technological advancement while also paying homage to traditional Japanese art production. The background, as you can see, resembles a kind of interior of a computer motherboard, reflecting the economic success and rise of Japanese industries, especially during the 1970s and 80s. At the same time, the use of this kind of gold recalls the background of traditional Japanese paintings and screens, especially flourishing during the 16th century. Now, both of these elements of the most kind of advanced technological and electronics of Japan, and also the traditional artistic production, is a great example of these negotiations in this theme. And in this vein, you see a quote from Kamekura himself talking about tradition. And here I quote, he says, "I believe that while tradition may be a burden to the designer, it is something which he cannot entirely reject. Our duty is rather to take our tradition apart and then put it together again in a new way." Now, if we go to the next poster, which also deals with this theme, this is also a great one called Trees by Yamashiro Ryuichi, was for the forest protection movement, sponsored by the Japanese government. Here is a great example where we see these trends coming in, fully utilizing the unique relationship between image and text. We see the poster's typography play on the pictographic origin of the Chinese character here for tree, where the character for tree or ki, which repeated twice, becomes hayashi or woods, and added another one on top becomes the character for forest or mori. Now, these characters are dispersed throughout the composition to suggest a kind of typographic forest. Font size and even the orientation is varied to give you that visual sense of the forest here that further enhances their function as a graphic element. And so we see here, and that is the kind of negotiation between that Japaneseness and these Western influences and design techniques that we wanted in this first section. So this is, I'll conclude the first section here and pass it on to Erin for the next section. But if we want to stop for a moment for any questions on this section, that's fine as well. If not, Erin can move on to the next section.
Of course. So in this continued dialogue with tradition, Japanese posters are very much rooted in the ukiyo-e tradition of woodblock printing, which valued collaboration and creative vision among artists, designers, publishers, printers, and patrons. The evolution of Japanese poster design is informed by ukiyo-e's commercial and pictorial content, as well as advancements in modern printing technologies. Many 20th century poster designers, such as Sato Koichi and his series that you see here, have acknowledged and paid homage to the artistry, content, and techniques of ukiyo-e and its sources. So with this particular series, sponsored by Tai Printing Company, Sato's 5 Seasons posters blends the iconic form of Mount Fuji in various color and perspectival combinations with his own haiku poetry to create multiple levels of meaning. And this series is reminiscent of Hokusai's famous ukiyo-e print series, 36 Views of Mount Fuji. Perhaps some of you may be familiar with that series or with the print artist Katsushika Hokusai. So each of the posters in 5 Seasons provides a different perspective or view of Fuji, beginning in the new year and spanning spring, summer, autumn, and winter, very much in a dialogue with the print series that you see here that I've shared a print from 36 Views of Mount Fuji. So any questions? I'm happy to move on to the next section. Okay.
Oh, it does look like we have a question about the 5 Seasons poster really briefly. Which, by the way, I just, as an aside, this is probably my favorite series and exhibition. I just love it so much. But how were these posters used commercially?
So that's a great question. So it was sponsored by the Taiyo Kikai Printing Company. And I think in many ways it was meant to showcase what the company could do in terms of the print technology. So if you were to reach out to them for a commercial project, this was a way in which I think this series could show, and you can see here the use of color. You can see there's metallic embossing on some of these posters. The way in which it's also engaging with text, particularly the sort of calligraphic writing of the poetry of the poetry, the haiku poems by Sato Koichi. So I think in many ways, again, it was to really highlight the capabilities of the printing company and sort of the potential of that for commercial printing if you were to engage. And then also too, I think, again, to this particular series to make a connection with this sort of broader history or tradition of printing in Japan, and that this particular company was maintaining or sustaining that legacy.
Yeah, and then do you know how these were printed, like what medium they were?
So these were lithography, so paper, and I think with that, I'm not sure exactly how the embossing was done, but that was certainly, I think the color was printed first, and then the metallic embossing was layered over it. And if you're able to see attend the in person, the exhibition, it's really quite beautiful. You can really see with each of the posters the different ways in which this metallic embossing was used to create sort of a sheen and a shimmer, and to highlight certain aspects of the color that was layered underneath.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely have to see these in person because the embossing is just so chef's kiss. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, I'll move on to the next section.
Oh, sorry. One more question.
Okay.
So this is, again, there's so much that you could dive into. We could spend a whole hour on this, these 5 posters alone. But why is the autumn poster upside down? Do we know?
Yeah, I think this is, we're supposed to sort of see it as a reflection in the water. And so, and I think also just to create sort of some just visual interest that, is somewhat different than the other 4 posters. But yeah, we're to read that as the seeing Mount Fuji reflected in the water. So it sort of looks from our vantage point as if it's upside down.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the next section, selling the national image. defining modern Japan. So in the years leading up to and following World War I, Japan witnessed unprecedented prosperity. Advances in public transportation, communication, education, and print publishing increased opportunities for the growing urban middle class and contributed to the rise of mass media. Technological innovations in commercial printing and photography improved the quality of images and the demand for posters promoting a modern lifestyle that emphasized the consumption of Western goods. In an effort to shape the national perception of Japan, posters played a critical role in selling an image that fused modern identity with an active participation in consumerism. This was also an era in which the rise of Japanese imperialism became intricately tied to the government's agenda of industrialization and modernization. So reprographic media, including posters, became an important propaganda tool for selling an image of modern Japan that was not only culturally and economically superior to other Asian nations, but also directly linked consumerism with patriotism. So for instance, the poster you see here is from a series for the Nikkei Clothing and Textile Company. During the 1930s, Okuyama Gihachiro, an artist and commercial designer, produced a series of posters advertising Nikkei as a premier Japanese textile manufacturer. So this poster reflects both the consumer's taste for Western dress and Okuyama's training in Sosaku Hanga, which was a movement characterized by personal expression, often involving artists carving and printing their own woodblock print designs. And so he uses Sosaku Hanga here to create a dynamic composition that blends typography and illustration to market the company's versatility as a woolen specialist, whose assortment of textiles, including winter woolen fabrics for suits, shirts, long underwear, and socks, were sold at an accessible price point and were versatile enough to be used in both men's and women's clothing, as well as school and military uniforms. Japan's reemergence after its devastating defeat in World War II was characterized by a variety of political shifts and economic transformations that shaped the trajectory of post-war society. So the militarism and patriotism of wartime were replaced with themes promoting recovery, peace, and prosperity. In the preceding decades of the post-war era, Japan hosted a number of major international events, including the 1964 Tokyo Summer Olympics, the 1970 Osaka Expo, and the 1975 Okinawa Ocean Expo that celebrated national progress and symbolized a successful return to the global arena. So posters of this period, such as the ones that you see here, combined elements of traditional Japanese art with modern graphic design, advertising the recasting of Japan's global image through international partnerships and transnational cultural exchange. Japanese designers such as Kamekura Yusaku and Nagai Kazumasa introduced a new distinctive national identity as they reimagined established Japanese motifs for a contemporary audience. So this is perhaps best exemplified in the work of Kamekura Yusaku, who was one of the most famous graphic designers of the post-war period and best known for the poster series that he created for the 1964 Tokyo Olympic Games. So the Olympics marked a watershed moment for Japan as it re-entered the world stage, presenting a new post-war identity of peace, prosperity, and resilience. And so in the image that you see here, Sakai Yoshinori, the official Olympic torchbearer that year, was depicted in one of the posters from this series, and he became a symbol of this identity of peace, prosperity, and resilience. Sakai was born in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, the same day the United States dropped the first atomic bomb. And so this poster series was quite important within that context, and it also marked the first time in which Kamekura incorporated photography into his design scheme. 6 years later, Japan hosted the first World Expo in 1970, attracting a record 64 million people. Set against an opaque black backdrop, Kamekura's winning design for the official Expo 70 poster depicts a minimalist geometric interpretation of a red cherry blossom with 8 golden rays emanating from its 5-petaled center. And the color choice here of the gold, the red, and the black is also reminiscent of Japanese lacquerware. So in a similar vein, Nagai Kazumasa's Expo 75 poster references traditional art of the Edo period. The metallic silver outline of a wave in the Rimpa style is superimposed over a photograph of the expansive blue ocean. So rinpa emerged in the early 17th century in Japan and is characterized by stylized natural forms and allusions to traditional court literature and poetry, as well as lavish application of metallic pigments. And the wave motif is also reminiscent of Hokusai's iconic woodblock print, The Great Wave from 1831, and is repeated, you can see at the top, in the logo that Nagai created for the event. However, this blending of tradition and modernity is perhaps best exemplified in the work of designer Tanaka Iko. So over his 50-year career, Tanaka developed a commercial style that combined traditional Japanese artistic forms with modernist principles of simplicity, clarity, and minimalism. Tanaka was internationally recognized as a leading force in commercial and corporate branding, especially in his role as the first artistic director of the Japanese retailer Muji. So this is perhaps Tanaka's best known poster, and it's also one of the posters highlighted in the exhibition. He created this for the Asian Performing Arts Institute and its celebration of traditional Japanese dance, music, and theater. It depicts the highly stylized head and shoulders of a female buyo dancer with simple geometric forms and colors. And Tanaka reinvented traditional motifs through this kind of bold color blocking and abstraction in an effort to package Japanese culture for an international audience. So before we move on to the next section, are there any questions? Went through a lot of posters here. Okay, I'll move on.
All right, great. So this is the next section. Just to say, though, that the one that you just saw beforehand, Tanaka Iko, we were told by the design team was kind of the DNA of the exhibition. So you are seeing all of the kind of geometric shapes run through the entire exhibition. And in this section, in this photograph, you also see it as well. And these geometric patterns become bigger and bigger as you immerse into the sections of the exhibition. So you really feel like you're in a Japanese poster. So if any of you have the chance to visit in person, I hope you'll feel that kind of immersion as you're going through these sections. Now, this next section, called The Rise of Japanese Industry and Role of Design, is really about the post-war now. After World War II, when Japan embarks upon one of the most intense and sustained periods of economic growth, that's sometimes also called Japan's economic miracle. Now, the Japanese government shifted away from heavy wartime industry to a more local production of light industry, like the production of cars, bicycles, and electrical appliances. And during the 1950s, posters and advertisements for home electronics boasted a domestically produced new electric era. And among them, people might know best the company Sony, which is perhaps the most globally recognized Japanese brand that emerged during this time, and also paved a path for portable music with its Sony Walkman cassette player that was released in 1979. And so you will see this poster here, the Sony one, that happens to be my favorite one in the exhibition, is for the Sony battery, actually. I think the next slide has a bigger version of this. And this is also the one that I think is the best to see in person because it uses a kind of metallic, almost laminate sheer material that this image is printed upon. So you'll see the kind of transparency in the poster when you see it in person. Now, as Sony's portable electronic devices like the Walkman and also the video camera developed, battery sales also gained necessary popularity. And this is an advertisement of that. You see an enlarged photograph of one battery that serves as a kind of vertical pillar and around which we see the 5 members of the Japanese girls rock band Princess, or in Japanese shortened as Puri Puri for Princess. And this was a band that was active during the 1980s and 90s and considered still, I think, one of the most successful all-female rock band group in the country. Now, this popular band, the battery, and the reference to the portability of music all create the strong sense of brand identity around the Sony Corporation. The 1960s embraced Japan's shift to this kind of export trade that included electronics and automobiles that initiated a leisure boom that ultimately resulted in an astonishing wealth and prosperity. So if the 1960s then was characterized by this kind of intense national growth, we then see the 1970s marked by personal enrichment through lifestyle of leisure, comfort, and beauty. And among the corporations that rise in this category, we might know best the cosmetic company Shiseido. And we were very lucky to be able to include 4 wonderful posters by Shiseido that you see up here. Now we see one, Love in Color, which is for an advertisement for a lipstick line, and then 3 called the Big Summer Series. In the next slide, you'll see a little bit more up close. This one, Love in Color, which is for a lipstick series. And Nakamura Makoto was the art director for Shiseido from the mid-90s through to the 1980s. He started to employ Japanese models in these brand advertisements that emphasize the importance of Japanese beauty as part of their image. And earlier designs by Shiseido almost exclusively used Western women in their ads. This was a new thing. In the late 1960s, we also see more and more incorporation of English words into these Japanese advertising that became very popular. And on the bottom right corner, we also see the Camellia brand logo, which was their logo since the 20th century. And next, we were really fortunate to have these 3. They're quite stunning in person, series called the Big Summer Series for a bronzer and suntan oil. In this photograph, we see the usage of the contour of both the woman's face and her body to kind of give the sense of, sand, sun, and sweat. And the Big Summer campaign won the designer here, Matsunaga Shin, the Tokyo Art Director Club's prize for 3 successive years from 1969 to 71. So this was a really big series that people really loved during that time as well. And I think we can still quite appreciate the visual aesthetics today. So that's this section here. If there are any questions before we move on to the next section, that'd be great, or we can move on.
So we do have a question. Actually, I think that, okay. So in the Love in Color poster, there's something missing from this. We asked on our Instagram post, and folks are following up for the answer.
Oh, great. Yes. So you might notice that the central model is missing her left ear. And sometimes you don't realize, but when you start to look at it, it's really obvious. And so apparently Nakamura Makoto, the art director, had it erased because he didn't want to distract from the eyelashes of the second model that is kissing the first one there. So yes, that is the one missing thing in this one.
Thank you. And then I was
Thanks
going
for bringing that up.
I was going to save this question for the end, but since a lot of the posters that we just saw did actually feature women, I think now is like a good time to ask. Are any of the works in the exhibition made by women designers? And could you elaborate maybe on the situation or representation of women designers in Japan during this time period? I know that's challenging because of the expansive time period of the entire exhibition.
Yes, so we do have one really renowned female art director that will come up in the last section. So I won't talk about that poster yet, but we do have one female designer that we feature in our exhibition. But that was quite rare. It's really, throughout the 20th century, it was very rare for female art directors to become really famous and to be renowned. And so unfortunately, we only feature one in the exhibit. But as you can see, women were a huge part of these subjects to be part of these posters. And we see that as a continuation from the Edo period, in which bijinga, or images of beautiful women, were very much included and used as a kind of almost locus for these new issues of modernization and westernization that were mapped onto the female body. So we see a lot of the female imagery coming out in these posters, as we just saw in this section, but not that many who are the kind of producers of these designs. And so, yeah, that is an unfortunate bit, but we do focus on one that comes in the last section. So please be tuned in for that section when we talk about Ishioka Eiko. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
All right, shall we get to the next? Yeah.
All right. So building on this post-war era, Japan was also partially defined by the Americanization of modern life, a condition that was accelerated by the Allied occupation, which lasted from 1945 to 1952. Even after the end of the occupation, there continued to be a sustained influx of American products, commercial products, and fads, in addition to a rising awareness of the political and social protests of the counterculture movement. All of this was assisted by the dramatic evolution of electronic media, as Nozomi mentioned in the previous section, during this period. So in addition to corporations like Sony, the development of television, film, radio, and music. Avant-garde collectives such as Gutai and Jiken Kobo, which translates to experimental workshop, played an integral role in these developments, working across various media and eschewing conventional fine art materials as they embrace new technologies and everyday objects. Such activities anticipated anti-art, conceptual art, and pop art movements of the 1960s and 70s that not only sought to reconceive the relationship between art and society, but also represented a response to the political turmoil of the post-war era. Within this atmosphere of change, Japanese artists began to rethink hierarchies within the art world, questioning definitions of art making and exhibition practices by blurring the boundaries between commercial and fine art. Many artists moved their creative work out of museums and galleries and into city streets, parks, and underground theaters. So within this milieu, the work of Yoko Tadanori and Tanami Keiji, two of Japan's most famous artists and commercial designers, inhabit the fluid space between art and advertising, acting as conduits among the avant-garde and the everyday. Throughout their professional careers, Yoko and Tanami experimented in various media and modes of representation, including graphic design, illustration, painting, film, animation, and fashion. Early examples of their work that you see here include poster advertisements that were created for avant-garde artistic collectives. So Yoko's, which is the Petticoat Osen, A Tale of Forgetfulness, was created for the avant-garde underground theater group Jokyo Gekijo, or Situation Theater, promoting one of their theatrical productions. And here you can see Yoko's embrace of this pop art aesthetic. And then Tanami's poster, Discovery of the Image, promotes avant-garde artist Matsumoto Toshio's influential book, Discovery of the Image, Avant-Garde and Documentary. And so Matsumoto was a pioneering video artist who created numerous experimental documentaries and collaborated with artistic collectives such as Jiken Kobo, who I mentioned earlier. And so Tanami was very much engaged with this group of creators and artists. So with regard to Yoko, throughout his professional life, Yoko continued to experiment with a range of media and modes of representation, engaging with both traditional Japanese imagery and American pop culture. While he is most celebrated for his bold and colorful posters from the 1960s, an example of that you see here, the Word and Image poster, in which fragmented images drawn from pop art, kitsch, and commercial photography, as well as in some cases ukiyo-e motifs, are transposed into dynamic screen-printed collages. His commercial works also for major brands such as Suntory, Toshiba, and Asahi broadcasting integrates the graphic and the painterly, as well as motifs taken from advertising, avant-garde, and everyday objects. And so you can see that here, this sort of range of work that he did across these spaces. The word and image poster is actually from the advertising poster for the word image exhibition at MoMA in 1968. And that was the first time Yoko had come to the United States and participated in the exhibition. And he was asked to create the advertising poster for this poster exhibition at MoMA. And then the other two you see here, the Beatles, that was one that he had made for Toshiba when the Beatles were touring Japan. And then, of course, Suntory Brandy is a reference to, in many ways, Japan's drinking culture that developed after, in the post-war period after the occupation, and the ways in which Yoko's work is engaging with a more sort of commercial focus. And then similarly, Tanami Keiichi's artistic output spans painting, illustration, graphic design, animation, and sculpture. So although he began his career as a commercial art director, his exposure to the avant-garde neo-Dada groups in the early 1960s, as well as his participation in the animation festival at the Sogetsu Art Center, inspired him to embrace a variety of new visual styles. And Tanami is most famous for his colorful psychedelic designs, such as the one that you see here, that incorporate pop culture iconography with silkscreen and collage. And so here we see his album poster and cover for the US band, The Monkees. And so you really get a sense of the ways in which he's engaging across these spaces with US popular culture. He also designed magazine inserts for the Japanese edition of Weekly Playboy, and had opportunities to travel to the United States and engage with a number of artists during the 1960s and 70s. Any questions for this section?
We have a great question about this section. Was a lot of this work influenced by Peter Max, or was he the inspiration for Peter Max?
That's a really good question. I think I would say in reference to Tommy Keiichi, that is that correct?
I believe so, and yeah.
I mean, I think Tanami was very much an inspiration to a number of US designers and artists during this period. I mean, I think what is really evident in both Tanami's work and Yoko's is this really exciting and active dialogue across Japan and the United States during this period, and the ways in which both artists were traveling to the US. A lot of US artists were traveling to Japan, and this opportunity to reconnect and to develop relationships during the post-war era through art, through commercial design. And you're really starting to see that interchange, that dialogue, or that sort of discursive space through the visuals in the material that these artists were creating.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Any other questions for this section? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so now we're at the final section called The Future of Japanese Poster Design, Environment, and Climate. So after all of this excitement and all of the variety of posters we've seen, we kind of decided to conclude with a little bit more of a serious theme that brings us to our today, I think, and what resonates with us, and the themes that are still important for many of us. So Japan's rapid economic recovery, we've seen unprecedented growth and rise in consumption, all of that during the post-war era were viewed as great successes, but they also brought new concerns regarding the environment, pollution, deforestation, and animal extinction. And poster designers have responded to these environmental issues either through commissioned work or designs that were created specifically for exhibition. And this also carries over with the themes of bridging art and the commercial realm that Erin just talked about. So here in this exhibition, we feature a number of series, 2 series specifically, that are still ongoing. Now, the first one is Nagai Kazumasa's Life series, which addresses the relationship between humanity and the environment in these posters here. Now, Nagai started this series in 1987 and still continues to produce it today. There are over 1,000 posters in this series, all employing animals and plants as their central motif, with minimal text, as you see here. This series does not advertise or promote a specific corporation or client, and was produced by Nagai as part of his own artistic endeavor, created many of them by hand and usually silk screened as well. And such production, again, demonstrates this blurring of the lines between the fine art and commercial posters. We also see, and we were really lucky to be able to include a fashion piece as well, this tunic piece that we have here that is in collaboration with the poster series. This is by the renowned fashion designer Issei Miyake, who unfortunately recently passed this fall. And this designer, Issei Miyake, also collaborated with a lot of designers that we feature in the exhibition as well. So we wanted to bring together the kind of fashion world and poster designs that we see here. If you go to the actual exhibit, there is a mirror in front of the tunic so that you can see the back design as well, and the smaller versions of all of the animals that are part of this series here. Now, also, as Japanese designers became active agents of positive change, they also contributed to peacemaking efforts that strove to deal with the memories of the war. So we see a few of the examples here, and I'll talk about the two on the left, which is part of the series called the Hiroshima Appeals, which is also a still ongoing series. Now, this one here is the kind of bookend, the beginning and the end of the first part of this series that conveys the wishes and prayers for peace after the devastating bombing of Hiroshima. Now, this first one is by Kamekura Yusaku, which is also the first poster that we started with the Japan and the motherboard, the golden one too. And then the second one I'll go into later as well. So in this first one, this groundbreaking first poster for this Hiroshima Appeals series, was a collaborative poster campaign by the Japan Graphic Design Association, the biggest Japanese graphic association that is still going on today, called JAGDA, and also the Hiroshima International Cultural Foundation. We see through the use of these vividly colored burning wings that Kamekura, who was the president of this association at the time, captures the moment of ignition, alluding to the sudden blast that enveloped Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, one of two atomic bombings at the end of World War II, followed by the atomic bombing of Nagasaki 3 days later on August 9, 1945. The coexistence of both beauty but with violence highlights the importance for the promotion of peace after the war. Now, our second one of the Hiroshima Appeals that marks the end of this first kind of segment in 1990 is by Ishioka Eiko, our only female art director in Japan at the time that we feature in the exhibit. She frequently collaborated with other artists as well. Here, she partnered with the popular illustrator Charles White III, a Black American designer who had created a poster for the Star Wars as well. Now, Ishioka's use of Mickey Mouse in this design is intentionally subversive. Now, the cartoon character, a universal icon of upbeat Americanness and also consumerism, is shown frowning with his eyes covered. Now, this gesture we can read perhaps in several ways, right? As either an act of shame or of deliberate blindness to world issues. Now, in response, I think you can see, right, that Disney was not pleased with the use of Mickey here, and Disney sent Ishioka a cease and desist, prohibiting her from distributing this poster. Now, it's wonderful that the series after 1990 was resumed again in 2005 to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the end of World War II. And in 2013, the Hiroshima Peace Creation Fund also became a sponsor. Today, the posters are given the honor of being presented to the mayor of Hiroshima, as well as receiving international acclaim. And today, our virtual tour is at a timely date because we will have the G7 summit that takes place in Hiroshima, and the summit starts from May 19th, so only several days to come, right? And Japan's current Prime Minister, Kishida Fumio, is especially keen to host this G7 summit at his own hometown in Hiroshima. He's also determined to bring issues of nuclear disarmament with regards to the context with what's happening in Russia and Ukraine as well. So this is very much an issue that is relevant to us today, unfortunately. Right, it's at this timing and within these recent events that has disrupted our international order again, that a site like Hiroshima, which holds so much significance historically and with gravitas, has come to our attention. Now, this year's poster for this Hiroshima Appeal series will be revealed in August in 2023. So that's something to look forward to for us as well. And so we conclude this section and also the exhibition with two ongoing series with two really important themes of peace and war, and also of the environment that is so very important to all of us today. And we wanted to end it this way so that everyone that went to the museum and the exhibit can take home these thoughts with them, and know that they would live with all of these audiences, because it's still quite important. Now, the creation of Japanese posters was the result, I hope you saw, both of fruitful and at times contentious collaborations among Japanese artists and designers, printing companies, corporations, and brands, and also the government, utilizing these various reprographic technologies to produce visual media that reflects this heightened relationship with the present moment in all of these important events and things that happens all throughout the 20th century. I hope you enjoyed this virtual tour. There is so much to see in the actual exhibit, and also lots of great merchandise that you can buy at the gift shop after you enjoy the exhibition, like these two that you see in the photographs. So I hope this virtual tour has enticed your interest and that you will be able to get to see all of these fantastic posters in person. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nozomi and Erin, thank you so much. This is fantastic. If you have any questions for Nozomi and Erin, now is the time to pop them in either the chat or the Q&A box. We do have a few minutes and we'll take as many questions as we can. The first question that we have is there a catalog for this wonderful exhibit, which we are getting asked quite a bit. Unfortunately, there is not a catalog, but as Nozomi has pointed out, there is a wonderful variety and selection of merchandise available in our shop. And we actually do have an online shop as well. So I can drop that in the link.
Oh, that's great. Also, you know, it was unfortunate that we couldn't have an exhibition catalog, but Erin and I are working on a publication, hopefully a book with this material and a lot of these great posters from the Merrill Berman collection. So please stay tuned for that as well, if you want to know more.
Absolutely. And then we have another question. Will there be a private tour for members coming up? Yes, great question. And that will be announced shortly. So keep an eye on your inbox. Another question, where is the Museum of Posters and can we visit? Absolutely. So we are based in the Manhattan neighborhood of Chelsea in New York City on 23rd Street between 6th and 7th, very conveniently located. We are open Thursday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. with extended hours through 9 p.m. and for free every Friday. Can you tell that I say that a lot? Okay. And then this is like a great question. I think Erin used a term when, and I apologize for butchering any of these names. I think Erin used a term when describing Nagai Kazumasa's design approach that sounded like Sarimpa. Did I completely mishear that, or could you please expand upon the term?
Sorry, yes, it's Rimpa. As I mentioned, it was a design movement from the Edo period that engaged with or sort of harkened back to motifs from medieval Japan. And so it's sort of known for this engagement with court poetry, sort of literary and artistic references from the Japanese court, and then also its use of metallic that we saw in the sort of the silver outlines of the wave, and really an engagement with, I would say, classical themes in poetry and sort of coming out of nature, of the seasons, and brought together in a variety of different forms of traditional art, such as painting, poetry, calligraphy, and so forth. Nozomi, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the wonderful thing about posters, and I think everyone has a different background, so they might see different things, but it's really, for sometimes you'll see a poster and you're like, wow, this is so actually contemporary, and we can see so much of what we see all the time in these posters. And then we'll also get a poster where we're like, wow, they're really looking back at Japan's kind of traditional arts and bringing all of that kind of traditional stuff in there. And so we're really seeing a lot of nice balance between how these designers are negotiating their own identity as both Japanese designers, but part of a larger kind of poster design, international design, kind of global community too. So we're really seeing that kind of both coming in and out. And so some of the labels you'll see us referring back to kind of really more traditional styles like the rimpa that Erin did. And then sometimes, we'll refer to things that still resonate with us today really well. So I think you'll see both all throughout the exhibit.
Yeah, and just to touch back to the quote that Nozomi had read at the beginning by designer Kamekura Yusaku, right? He writes, "Our duty is rather to take our tradition apart and then put it back together anew." And I think that you see that, sort of visually, there is that, I think that endeavor that designers of the 20th century are engaging with through this tension between this sort of reference to traditional Japanese aesthetics and visual culture, and then of course, the ways in which they're engaging with the sort of modern contemporary design motifs and commercial designers and artists, not just within Japan, but in other parts of the world.
Wonderful. That's actually a great dovetail into the next questions that we've had. I don't know that we'll be able to get to both of them, but are there any European or US influences on the Japanese posters, specifically regarding the typography and or vice versa, Japanese influence on European typography? I'm not sure if we'll be able to fully answer that just because no one in this room is a type historian, but it's definitely an interesting question.
Yeah, it certainly is. So typography, the use of typography in different fonts was part of a larger international kind of design trend. And if you can remember the very first one with trees that you saw, that was kind of a take on that trend with using, text and typography into a very more specifically Asian context. So that's an example of, these Japanese designers taking an international design trend and making it kind of their own in a way. I think in the sections that Erin talked about with Tanami Keiichi and so forth, there's a lot of that kind of psychedelic elements that are from kind of pop culture and the kind of American culture that are in those designs. And so in those cases, you can see the kind of more American kind of visual aesthetics coming into their posters. So we definitely see both ways happening.
Yeah, and I might add that artists like Tanaka Iko were also informed by the Bauhaus movement in Europe. And so they're definitely, I think this awareness and dialogue with with a variety of modern movements throughout the 20th century that are taking place in Japan as well as outside of Japan. But I don't know if I can speak with more specificity regarding typography itself. But I think, what Nozomi said around the Yamashiro Ryuichi poster is really also a nice way of engaging with typography, but also, with a level of specificity to Japan and the language itself, and the ways in which it's engaging with, many posters. There are examples of the ways in which designers are engaging with English, with hiragana, katakana, and kanji, the sort of variety of different texts that they use with regard to conveying sort of textually messages and ideas, and then the ways in which within that they'll play with typography to create some really interesting designs and visual play.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Erin and Nozomi, for this fantastic presentation. There are still a few more questions coming through, but I know that we're at time. Do you all have the time to answer 2 more questions, or should we call it?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate your generosity. So there is, do you have any recommendations for reference books on Japanese posters and print culture in the modern period?
Nozomi?
Yes, there are several books that we also looked at. I could put it in the chat while we're answering a different question. Would that be easier maybe to?
I just wanted to know, we had a wonderful colleague who acted as sort of just a collaborator named Ori Bartal, who does a lot with commercial design, Japanese commercial design and posters, and actually has written a lot about Ishioka Eiko's work, our female designer. He has 2 wonderful books that we reference, and he was also an advisor on the exhibition, and so was incredibly helpful and supportive as we were doing sort of researching and looking into this. So
Yes,
so we might have.
I've just put his name in the chat. So if you Google his name, he has 2 books, so you'll be able to
I think there's
find those books.
A wonderful book in the gift shop on a large volume.
Oh yes, there is.
Poster design. I'm blanking on the title of it at the moment, but if you're able to get to the museum in person, there's actually a number of really great reference books on Japanese design, but particularly it's a very large volume with a black cover, and there's a crane on it, I think.
I think it might be this one. I have the title, The Graphic Spirit of Japan.
Yes, I think that's it. Yeah.
Yes.
So these are 2 really great places to start.
Yes. And I just dropped a link into the chat where you can shop the exhibition products from the show, including the books that Nozomi and Erin are referencing now. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So this last question, I'm not quite sure if we'll be able to answer, but because I'm not quite sure what specific poster they're referencing, but the colorful work on the back wall appears to have a strong suprematist influence. Are there a significant number of Japanese works that reflect a similar influence?
I wonder which one.
I know it's hard to answer without knowing what one specifically. And I'm also wondering if they might actually be referring to the exhibition design itself, which is very geometric and colorful.
It might be, which in case it might be the Tanaka Iko poster here. Erin, if you want to speak about the Tanaka Iko poster, maybe, or if that is the question in fact.
I mean, like Nozomi had said, I mean, I think the exhibition itself, this poster is sort of our sort of hallmark image that was used as part of the design process, and really taking or sort of drawing on the geometric aspects of it. So, right, we see that within the context of the exhibition design and sort of each section, the ways in which color and geometric form are being used and sort of expanded upon as you move throughout the space. I mean, as a designer, Tanaka Iko, this particular image is, I think, really emblematic of his approach to design, really sort of paring down the image and thinking about the ways in which to convey an idea through, very simple forms. And that's what you have in this poster, the Nihon Buyo poster. Thinking of other images by him that aren't necessarily in the exhibition, but it's sort of a similar style. I think if you're familiar with his work, you would be able to pick out, his design, his aesthetic in other posters that he's created through this sort of this color blocking and geometric approach to design.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. They were actually referring to this
one. Yeah.
So, great. Yeah, wonderful. Well, those are all of the questions that we have today. I know that last one was a bit of a curveball, but I think you both handled it beautifully. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. Again, this presentation was fantastic, but if you can see the show in person, it's up through September 10th and is definitely worth like the visit in person so that you could see and feel the materiality of these posters, especially the metallic ones. There's just no replacing the in-person experience. So we hope to welcome you to Poster House soon. Thank you again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.